So that was an exclusive report from Sarah Firth from northern Syria. To break it all down, joining our panel from London is Ian Black, who is a senior visiting fellow at the Middle East Centre at the London School of Economics. Ian, thanks for joining us here on Straight Talk. Let me start with you. Where do these Daesh fighters stand when it comes to the international law, and what are their rights? How are they supposed to be prosecuted?
Well, it's quite a complicated story. I think it's important to point out that this is all quite new. It was only at the end of March that President Donald Trump declared victory over Daesh, ISIS. And since then, the issue of the future of particularly of foreign and European fighters with Daesh has become a big problem. There's no obvious solution, and nor is there any kind of consistency between the different countries. I mean, the American position is that countries should repatriate people who have fought with Daesh, and they should stand trial in national courts. But that hasn't happened very much at all. I mean, for example, there's a case in Britain, a well-known case of a young woman called Shamima Begum, who is in a camp in northern Syria. She was with Daesh, and she has been stripped of her British nationality, but is now fighting through the courts. She's still in Syria, and she's fighting through the courts to be allowed to come home. There are similar inconsistencies with the French and German governments as well,
Yes.
which together, those three countries make up the largest number of European volunteers. So it's early days yet in a complicated story.
Yes, and on the other hand, tens of thousands of foreign fighters. I'd like to ask you this question to you, Yasser. They didn't come alone. They brought their families, they started their families while fighting for Daesh in Iraq and Syria. Where do they families stand when the international law is concerned? Because we've seen Iraq handing out some sentences for the spouses of those fighters, whether it be a prison sentence or a death sentence for aiding and abetting the fighters. Where do they stand?
Well, it depends on the criminal code under which that you're trying to conduct trials for these suspected criminals. But universally, usually, the concept of aiding and abetting requires some form of mental state and some form of action. And so if these families were there, even though it's not against their will, but they were there just as spouses and children, I suspect that they would be culpable by this aiding and abetting doctrine. But I'd be remiss, actually, not to go back and sort of recontextualize this entire, ISIS fighters' potential prosecution as war criminals. I mean, I think that while this is extremely important and a step that is very much needed in terms of international justice as to what took place in Syria towards Syrians, especially Yazidi women and other minorities in the north, one has to absolutely acknowledge that the number one culpable party in terms of the destruction and the mayhem and the absolute murder and mass murder of the Syrian people is the Assad regime. Some of the reports actually put them at 95 to 97% as the responsible party for the majority of the victims in Syria. And so as a Syrian, I look forward towards a day that we have an international legal mechanism to prosecute not only Daesh, which is very much in needs of prosecution, but also of Bashar al-Assad and his regime for their culpability as well.
All right, Ian, I just want to get back to you. You've just mentioned the different stances adopted by different countries, namely France, Britain, and America. And just in the past week, Iraq has announced that it would be executing several French nationals. Could this set a precedent for other countries like Syria that are dealing with the foreign fighters? What do you say?
Well, I think that we know that there have been various foreign fighters have been transferred into Iraqi custody, including, interestingly, just a report by Reuters a few days ago saying that the United States had transferred foreign fighters into Iraqi custody, despite the formal position of Washington that it wants fighters to be tried in their own countries. So again, that's part of the inconsistency in government approaches to this question. The French government has, of course, protested against those sentences, the death sentences handed down by Iraqi courts. But of course, it's shown no signs of wanting to repatriate French nationals for them to face justice in their own country.
So Ian,
that's exactly what I was...
Yeah, as you mentioned, the foreign minister said they were asking Iraqi authorities not to execute those people, but he also said they had a fair trial. So do you think European countries who have nationals that joined Daesh would welcome moves like Iraq is taking?
Well, I think that, you know, they might welcome it, but I think that they'll also face domestic pressure. The Shahima Begum case that I've mentioned is an example of that. The British government decided to strip this young woman of her nationality. She had a family connection to Bangladesh, but the Bangladeshi government said that she had she didn't in fact have Bangladeshi nationality at all. It's a really complicated issue, particularly when it involves children. And I do think it's important to point out that children who are underage have no responsibility at all for what their parents did. So that's an enormously complicating factor. And I think I'm right in saying that in the French case, they have quietly repatriated children of French nationals whose own fate is still uncertain.
Hakki, my last question. In the past, we see the intelligence sharing between Turkey and European countries were limited. But now we see some improvements.
Yes.
Do you believe it is enough to trace these fighters, these terrorists, and prevent them from infiltrating Turkey?
I think it's not enough yet. As Yasser mentioned here, there is these very gray areas there. Who is responsible? For instance, does the SDF have any jurisdiction on anything, let alone trying people? I mean, can they operate a municipality running water system? Who are they? They are, as far as all the parties are all practically concerned, are extension of PKK and PYD, and they have no right to do anything in Syria. So they cannot hold anybody in custody. And Europeans should remember one thing. When they passed through Turkey, it was legal to do that. But now they are criminals. They should be tried either there or either in Turkey or in an international court. Before they do that, they shouldn't, France and Germany and England shouldn't force Turkey to open a channel to allow them to go back to their country.
Yes, I think we have to leave it here, and I guess we will be talking about the Syrian issue in the coming future as well. I would like to thank Ian Black, who joined us from London, and Hakki Ocal and Yasser Tabara. Gentlemen, thank you for your contributions to Straight Talk. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.